Casey, great to chat to you again. How are you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing very well. You challenged me to come up with some questions that you haven't talked about before, which is difficult because you've blessed the internet with many instructive hours of content.
I'm not sure everyone would describe it as a blessing, but all right.
you,
Cursed the internet,
yourself
maybe?
yeah.
No. I've
I think
cursed
there's
the
a lot
internet
of,
with it. Yeah.
a lot of very grateful people out there who are benefiting from all your work, getting your thoughts and experiences out. So I'm grateful. I'm sure lots of other people.
I'll take it.
I've got a few different topics, and I thought I'd start by asking you about IP.
Okay, sure.
And I've noticed that in general, my friends who are in software or in tech, just in broad strokes, have a slightly different gut feeling about intellectual property than everyone else. And that is to say,
Interesting. Very
people
interesting.
in software tend to have that slightly hippie-ish attitude of we should all just be able to do anything, and why are we protecting intellectual property, or it doesn't make sense. And I probably find myself drawn a little bit in that direction myself. I tend to think that ultimately treating ideas and thoughts and creative output as property is a bad solution to what we actually want to do, which is to kind of encourage and remunerate people for doing intellectual stuff that's of value. Like I agree with the impulse, but what are your thoughts? Like patents, copyright, trademark. Are these systems working? Are they doing what they were supposed to be doing? How would you change them?
So it's a really broad topic. So this will probably be the podcast, right? 2 hours later, we'll finish it, and that's it. It's like Casey and Luke talk about IP law, which is totally fine with me. I'm happy to do that because I think it's really interesting, and I think it's really it's a very misunderstood area of human endeavor as well, because I think a lot of people, this is something that I think we are all guilty of at some point in our lives, and probably at all points in our lives, but just, we learn as we go, which is when we look at something that exists or is functioning, we tend to look at ways in which it's not working, and we assume that, like, well, if you just didn't have this thing, you wouldn't have this problem or whatever, or it's like this is causing the problem. But usually what you're seeing is some really tail end of a long human endeavor that was like, how do we get this ridiculous system of now billions of humans all doing work randomly, have to be fed, have to be directed to do various things, have to work together. Like, what does that look like? And so, as critical as I always am of things, I always come from the engineer mindset of like, we can always do better. So I'm never going to look at something like a patent system or a trademark system or whatever and say, well, that's perfect. We don't need to ever change anything. I do always try to go like, okay, well, hold on. Like, what problems is this solving that we're not realizing we would immediately have if it actually went away, and all those sorts of things. You see this oftentimes also with critiques of like capitalism now, which is like an interrelated thing, right? And it's like, usually, like in your setup to your question, I am almost always sympathetic with the criticisms, in the sense that I agree that the things that people are pointing out are problems usually are. Like, it's not that common that people are complaining about something that's actually perfect and they just don't understand or something. Like, that's not that common. It's usually that where I part ways is like, they're acting like there's some simple solution, or that getting rid of the thing will solve the problem, when actually it will probably just create way more problems than it solves. And so what we really need is the very hard work of what are the targeted ways forwards, right? And I think that's true of most systems that are currently in place today, because many of them have been evolved over so many years, millennia sometimes, that it's hard for us to comprehend all the things they are solving that we've forgotten about because we just haven't experienced those problems in so long. Does that make some sense as a setup or as a framing for this discussion?
It's very helpful to say that,
Okay.
yes, if we meddle with things, yes, we might have the positive change that we are expecting, but we've got to watch out that we're not accidentally creating loads of negative changes in that as well.
I have a pithy saying I say sometimes, which is that liberals are always right that we need to change things to make them better, and conservatives are always right that we shouldn't change them because because they'll be bad when we do. Right? It's like it's an interesting struggle, but people in those camps tend to think that they're the ones who are correct about things, and actually no. What you're looking at is a very complex system. And the people who want to keep things the way they are for whatever reason, even if it's only personal interest, are actually right that it is fragile. And if you go making changes, you're probably going to break something, right? And the people who want to break the thing are also right that if we don't break things occasionally, or if we don't try those new things, we have to change them. They both tend to overstate the position, right? Things were perfect, we don't need to change anything, that's wrong. Or these changes we're going to make are going to be great. Also usually wrong, right? And so, it's kind of like this constant struggle to try and convince everyone. It's like, actually, there's a lot of good things we do need to keep, and also we do need to have targeted ways of moving forward. Otherwise, we stagnate, and we'll never improve the system that we have. And if our forebears had done that, then we wouldn't have as good a systems as we have today that we're complaining about right now, right? If they had just stayed where they were, we'd all be farming in like a feudal land system or something, right? Whenever they stopped, that's where we would be. So I just throwing that out there as a starting point, if you will, so people know where I'm coming from.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I guess one of my suspicions is that although the stated aims of a lot of these systems are to encourage creativity, that the reason we have the systems in the form that we have them today is because the people who really make the decisions are doing so for their own interest and don't tend to be the small creators. So the classic example would be Disney. Every time Mickey Mouse was about to go into the public domain, the lawyers extended copyright for another 5-10 years to give themselves a bit more breathing room. Whereas if you talk to individuals, they tend to think, as long as I've got copyright, if I've got control over my thing that I've created for 5 years, that's probably enough. So is the system has it been created? I guess the starting point I'm making is that the actual effect that IP laws as they currently exist have is to discourage creativity and to make it harder for the small creators to make money from their creative work, whereas the giant companies which already have lots of money and could do the innovation that they want to do without any need for protection are actually able to just be anti-competitive and stomp on other people.
So I guess what I'd say about that is there's a lot wrapped up in that question, and a lot of it hinges on specifics, right? So copyright is a little bit trickier, I think, to talk about than patents. So copyright, when especially even just what you said, in the abstract, if you were like, how long should copyright last for maximum, if you stated a goal, and I'm going to actually disagree with that goal in a second, but okay. I'm going to agree with that goal for now and say, let's say that the goal was to have the maximum number of creative works out there. So basically what we're looking to do is say, oh, okay, if someone creates Mickey Mouse, then we would like everyone to be able to create something with Mickey Mouse after the creators after Disney has gotten enough payback, whatever we think that value should be. I'm trying to phrase it, I think, in the spirit of your question, right? Something like this. We want Disney to get paid back for having made Mickey Mouse, and then at some point we want everyone to be able to do Mickey Mouse, right? Something like that.
That's fair. Yeah. I like that.
So if you look at something like that, I mean, I think there's no question that copyright is going on too long now, right? I mean, they're just like, I don't know, with 40 years plus lifetime of the author or the weird things like this, right? Just like, or 70 years now, whatever it is. It's like, I don't even keep track of it anymore. It's like, it's all you know is it's really long. Like, it's just, it's so long that we don't need to think about it, right? It's forever from the perspective of an individual, right? It's outlasts a human a lot of the time.
Yes.
And that seems obviously unnecessary. Like it's unclear who that's helping. It's unclear what the benefits to that would be to society. Like, it's unclear why we would want that. So I'm totally with you on that. But the reason I say copyright's kind of tricky is because also it's like starting a discussion of IP law from that as if that's a huge problem also strikes me as odd. Like, when I hear that, I'm like, it doesn't sound like a very solid position, because I'm like, who cares if people can use me? Like I don't really want like when I sit down at my computer, I'm not like, if only there were more Mickey Mouse property, if only there were more companies making Mickey Mouse movies. I'm not thinking that. I'm like, I don't really care. Like, it is a minor negative of current IP law that people can't use, that things don't enter the public domain perhaps as soon as they should. But in terms of the practical effects copyright-wise on that, for me, it's unclear that I care that much about them. And I could steelman that case and be like, well, maybe it would be easier to score things because, more recordings from the 50s would maybe be available now, so that would be easier to do YouTube. You wouldn't need, like, the sort of YouTube content library and something like that. But then I'm like, okay, was that a good thing? I like that composers are making money to selling YouTube video scoring, and it's one of those things where people say it as if it's like this big convincing thing, and I'm like, I understand where you're coming from, but at the same time, like, if that was the only problem with copyright right now, if that's the biggest thing you're looking, I'm like, eh.
Well, I'll
so maybe push harder on it. I would say maybe.
Let me try and construct a more practical reason. That copyright is causing actual harm. Let's talk about music. So. Yeah. There's quite a few cases where, and some of them have been won and some of them have been lost, but enough of them have been upheld where a small artist has been sued by a big act for a song that they wrote that's very similar to the big hit. I don't know, Rihanna comes out with a song and there's another song that's very similar that's in the charts. And because Rihanna's got the lawyers and the record label and so on, they're able to get the competing song destroyed. And it really discourages one of the dreams, I think, for a musician, maybe if I make music that's really popular and it gets this ground root support, I could make it. I could become full-time a musician, and so I will really work hard as a part-time thing alongside my job, hoping to make it as a musician. But when you see that in reality, what happens is the established acts can copy what you've done and then sue you for it, and then you end up with a debt. It actually causes people to give up on their dreams of becoming a musician, and the reverse never happens. You wouldn't ever be able to successfully take down Rihanna by suing her, because ultimately the way that the legal system works is the more money you have, you win. You have better lawyers. So I'd say in the domain of music, and to flip it round, the fashion industry, there's very little IP protection for fashion, and people are enormously inventive. There's every season, and not that I'm really plugged into fashion, but the impression I get is that there's this thriving, vibrant, innovative, artistic world of fashion where people, because there is a lack of IP protection, people are actually producing more exciting work and making the world more colourful and interesting. And I'm arguing that if we pushed harder for fashion, I don't know what it would be, patterns and cuts and things, to be protected. So the fashion house could say, we've invented the, I don't know, leotard crossed with a military suit, and now nobody can do it for 10 years. That would be, that would cause, it would probably cause simultaneous inventors, people who came up with the same idea at similar times, to be taken to court. And it would mean loads of people would, rather than experimenting with fashion and doing interesting stuff, would say, this is more trouble than it's worth. So I think on a real practical way, I don't know about the world of animation, but in the case of music, I do think it has a real tangible effect of making people. It causes the incumbents to be even stronger than they were already, and it causes the up and comers to lose hope and give up.
So there's a couple different things in there, and I'll try to pull them apart because they're kind of separate. So let's put fashionists aside for 1 second and just focus on first the music part. Mm-hmm. And again, this is why I said originally when I was like, copyright length is not such an interesting starting place. Like, this is a more interesting starting place, right? Because you're talking about something that's more tangibly affecting people. Like, not being able to use Mickey Mouse, it's hard for me to get particularly excited about, right? But somebody who gets unfairly entangled in an expensive legal dispute because of something that really should never have been litigated, that's a much more interesting, like, that's a much more interesting problem that you might want to solve, right? It's more like, it's more, it's something that's hard for people to avoid, right? Because this person, just don't use Mickey Mouse is the way that a creator can avoid getting entangled in the first kind. But how you don't know if Rihanna is going to sue you, I guess was the example, for some song that you write. And so I guess what I would say is copyright lawsuits obviously do have a history of being abused. But I guess what I would say is the first point I would make is it's not as one-sided as you would say. The abuse is actually bidirectional. It's also fairly common for people with a fairly illegitimate claim to sue some very popular thing, claiming that it was stolen from them. And you see this a lot of times in movie screenplays and scripts and stuff like this, where like someone will claim that the idea was stolen from such and such a story that was published in, and so on. That was a very common thing to have happen, and whether or not that was really warranted, it's hard to say, and so on. So there is definitely this issue of abuse, and abuse happens in the legal system always, right?
Yeah.
My question that I would pose is, well, what are you suggesting that the solution is to this problem? Because, for example, if we said music is not copyrightable, instead, like if the solution is, well, okay, we don't want these court cases, so we're not going to allow you to copyright songs. Well, then Rihanna's just going to look at whatever she wants. And if she finds your website, she likes that song, then she just copies that song onto her like YouTube channel and makes all the money. And there's nothing you can do. Because you're saying that you didn't want copyright. You didn't want the opportunity to go into court to say, no, I wrote that song first, and I have proof that I wrote that song first, and now Rihanna, she didn't even re-record it herself. Or maybe she took the exact song and just put her singing like, yeah, over the top of it occasionally. That's the actual real world we would live in. And so the problem is when people think about these things, they're like, so what's your alternative, right? The reason we occasionally have these problematic edge cases, which are that people go to court and we all agree that this was kind of a sham, like this court case is not as legitimate as we would like. Because there's plenty of copyright lawsuits that are very legitimate. And we're like, yes, that should have been litigated. You never hear about those. Most of what you're hearing about is like, oh, this one time where there was this bad thing. Sure, that does happen. But that's actually not the common case of what copyright is supporting. Usually what copyright is supporting is if you make a song, someone else can't literally duplicate it and just make all the money on their channel by using it. And that's good. We should want that, right? We should want that world to keep existing because most people who have this thought, the only thing they're thinking in their head when they're like, we should get rid of copyright is they're thinking we should get rid of everyone else's copyright. But somehow in their head, like the stuff they make still should have to be paid for or something so that they can put food on it. Like, it's weird. So I do think there's this problem of like, if you have a solution to this where we're still going to have it so that an artist who makes a song can get paid for that song and someone can't just literally duplicate it, I'm all ears. But I haven't heard that solution, right?
I'll give you the... Yeah. I'll tell you the world that I want to exist.
Okay.
It's a bit of a gamble because
all right.
I have a sort of utopian view, of course, that my idea would work
Okay.
out great. And my idea is that there should be no protection at all over copying and redistributing music, for
Okay.
example, or books or anything. And
Okay.
I think it would actually still result in authors and musicians getting more money, more income. Small writers, I think. And the reason the vision I have for this is that we would have then much more of a pay the artist in advance, a sort of
Kickstarter
patron
model.
Yeah. So
And patron.com, Kickstarter.com, that kind of
so
thing.
suppose I write a song and I release it into the world for free because there's no way to make money off it. And then Rihanna does a cover of it. She puts her cover out on the internet. She's also not making any money from the distribution of her copy of the song. So I guess we've both lost out in a sense. But
Why isn't she
people-
making money? She probably is. Like
well,
she's
she's probably selling tickets, right? She's
Well,
she's
or
gonna still
just-
be able to make money.
or advertising, sponsorships, that sort of thing, right? So she plays it on her channel. She collects a bunch of revenue for that, right? Because
Yeah, although
you know what I
of
mean?
course, in this hypothetical world, other people are able to. There's no reason you have to go to Rihanna's website and see the adverts connected to her.
that's true. You would just see them on some other site, and that person would get the ad revenue,
Yeah,
whoever
so
that random
I-
person is. Yeah.
I think we have to face that in this proposal. I'm saying if you can distribute it across a wire, if it's bits and bytes, nobody has any control. It's just flowing around the planet, sloshing around like water. So to make money off of your creative outputs, you have to, for example, say to your fans, look at all the great songs I've written over the last 10 years. I want to write some more, but I can only do it if you're prepared to fund me in advance, pay me for my time for the next year. I'm going to go and write some songs. And if I do a good job, then you'll pay me the next year. So the incentive is I'm not just going to take this money and run, because I actually want this to be my, if anything, I want to show how much more value I gave than what I received. And you could say, like with Patreon or Kickstarter, I'm going to include your name in the song if you pay me £1 million or whatever. And really, if you're a big pop star, you're going to want to sell. You're probably going to make most of your money from touring. So your interest is in making songs that add something genuinely unique, so that people come and listen to your music. And I think Rihanna, as an example, she's got a 1 in a million voice. So she's got a genuine opportunity, and she's got connections to all these people in the music industry. There's a good chance that Rihanna's version of the song is better than mine. But the real fans are going to be interested. Oh, who wrote that song? I wonder if he's writing other good stuff. I'm going to go and...
I highly doubt
you're
that.
skeptical.
Most people do not have any idea who wrote the songs today, and they easily could ask that question. But like many, pop songs are written by some, person in Sweden or a producer in LA or something, and nobody knows that. Like that's a very tiny. And the idea that somehow that is going to trickle down to the people who actually wrote the song seems incredibly
or
far-fetched to me.
How
but-
about, I've just emailed, I don't know, Katy Perry and said, I wrote the song that Rihanna released last year and it got 1 billion streams. How would you like me to write a song for you? The chances are first mover advantage. If the song is released as a Katy Perry song, people are going to want to go and listen to that version of it rather than the covers. So,
But why would anyone even bother? Why wouldn't they just go to this website where you're producing these things, take the song and record it? They don't need you at all.
no, but I could go to Katy Perry and say, well, look, I can write a song for you. I can pitch it perfectly to your voice. I can work with you and whatever. I could
All
put
right.
themes about space travel.
And Katy Perry's going to return that email randomly. Like she's going to happen to know. She's going to have bothered to look at who wrote the most recent Rihanna song. And that's
I think
that's
people in the
that's the
music
underlying model for your IP future is that you email Katy
people in the-
Perry.
I mean,
Okay.
you're right. Random listeners
Sounds a bit
don't
weird.
know the producers don't know
Yeah.
who wrote the song,
Yeah.
whatever. but people in the music industry do care about finding people with talent, and your ability to do great work will build a reputation over time. Because the whole industry is geared towards sharing, I think there would be much more of a culture of attributing credit. It doesn't cost Rihanna anything during her tour to say, I picked this song up from Luke. Why not go and check it? I think with a bit of generosity of spirit.
So, I mean, I'll start with a couple things. So in the music industry, as far as I know, what you're saying is already true. So I'm not sure why we would necessarily think that it would be a change, because you're allowed to cover. Like, cover is a fixed cost. You don't need permission to cover a song, right? You just cover it and pay the royalty rate, right? Music is very standardized, right, in that way already. Mm-hmm. And so really what you're talking about is just, well, now you don't have to pay that cover rate. Like, now, because we got rid of copyright, instead of requiring you to pay Luke when you cover his song, right? Now we're just saying, well, you can do it for free, but he can email Katy Perry. It's like the trade that we're making. And I'm like, why? Like, if the idea is that, well, the big benefit that we're going to get there is that occasional lawsuit by Rihanna who shuts down an independent creator, like, we're getting rid of all of that structure where you had to pay, where we're just requiring you to pay Luke because he wrote the song. Mm-hmm. We're getting rid of all of that because we just don't like these occasional, like, lawsuits. It doesn't seem like a great trade. Like, we could talk a little bit more about it. Like, maybe, okay, let's, like, what are the details here? Is this really better at the end of the day? Because, hey, it frees up the legal system and we're not going to have those lawsuits. And then, so, we're just going to say it's fine. Maybe. But the music industry kind of already is in a fairly bastardized version of copyright because they have a very specific set of very different copyright rules that don't apply to anyone else. That cover thing I said is not true pretty much anywhere else in IP law. The sort of compulsory license idea for playing songs like over a radio station, things like that, doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. As for the world of IP. You know what I mean?
The conceptual world.
Yeah, the conceptual world. And so... I'm like, okay, but really? Like, is that, like, do you really believe that, like, that would be so important that we should go rewrite the laws and risk the potential damage that could come from that just for the fact that occasionally Rihanna sues somebody? That's the only thing.
I mean, as I said originally, it's a massive gamble and it's a big unknown. I just have a suspicion that the alternative world in which we had gone down that route would have been a happier and less contentious and generally more pro artists. I think it's the environment that's created by everybody kind of trying to land grab concepts in an intellectual sort of the realm of forms. You're trying to say this collection of notes is mine, and that collection of words is mine, and this set of colors, or the Brat Summer color is now, or whatever. It just seems like a very unpleasant and non-creator friendly way to work. And again, maybe this is my hippie-ish Silicon Valley programmer coming through, but I just love the idea that we would all be sharing the beauty of art rather than trying to commercialize it. I do sound like a hippie.
You do, but let me try and go a little deeper on this, sure. Because, like I said, I'm sort of playing devil's advocate a little bit here, just to kind of, again, because I think usually that's the side that kind of needs to be played, because the people who listen to this podcast, the more common opinion will be the hippie opinion, right? It'll be like, everything should just be free, like all the software should be free and the music will be free and I run it all on my machine, and then for some reason people are still paying me so that I can buy the computer, but like everyone else, it's optional if they get paid. And it'll just work out because they'll email Katy Perry, right? It's a very common mindset. It's totally true. And somehow they're still getting paid, right? Like that's still happening, but everything's free. But anyway, let's dig a little deeper into that because I wanted to just talk about some underlying points I think are important to understand. Mm-hmm. So, first of all, there's the question of standards, which I think is very important because the legal standards that are used to evaluate some of these things, make a huge difference. And I do think that's a place where, if you really wanted to push on copyright law and say, how do we improve it in the short term without incurring a ton of risk, to the utopian sort of mindset where it's like, you think this is going to be great, but actually it turns out to be like an Oneida situation and everyone's dead, or we find a bunch of Kool-Aid and a bunch of dead bodies or something, right? Yeah. So there is this question of like, are the legal, like, what kind of legal standards do we want, right? And currently, you could easily pick a particular domain and argue that the legal standards that we're using to evaluate copyright are not what we would prefer. And one of the reasons for that I say that is if you have familiarity with the legal system, which again, a lot of people actually don't, but if you're familiar with how the legal system works, essentially, like, there's kind of this idea of a motion to dismiss phase of a lawsuit, which is like, is this thing, you could kind of think of that in your head as like, will this get expensive or won't it, right? And so if you have a situation where the legal standard is very ambiguous, right, where it's very like, it's hard for us to look at something on a set of alleged facts and go, there's no case here, right? Like, it's just, you had to have at least a measure, two measures copied verbatim or something, and if we can't find that in the thing, then this is immediately false, right? Mm-hmm. If you have a legal standard that's easy to apply at that stage, and it's clear that someone was not actually violating copyright or something like that, you get a lot less problems in that world. When the standard starts to creep, and it starts to be like, if a jury kind of thinks these things were sort of similar and, and all this, and like, it tends to be ambiguous so that it's very easy to get to an actual court case, that's where the abuse happens. Because then those are what are very expensive. They take a lot of lawyer time, as well as discovery and all this stuff, and it drags on forever. And that's when it can be very open to harassment, because even if they're going to lose in the end, they're just hoping that you will settle or stop doing what you're doing because you'd rather not pay to find out if you're going to win or not, right? Mm-hmm. So I do think the legal standards for evaluating these things are important. And like you said, you don't want to end up in a situation where people who do not actually care very much about the creative process or making things are able to land grab, as you said, and just they're just basically abusing the system to make money. Mm-hmm. And I would argue copyright, I don't really know that it's as big of a problem as people might make it out to be in copyright. Patents, it's not as bad now as it was. There was a time period, though, where it was really bad. So there was like a good 20-year span where patents was literally what you're talking about, like 24/7 in the software realm, where it's just like a complete nightmare, right? And so we have very good examples of IP law, maybe not as much in copyright because it is a little bit harder to abuse, but in patent law, 100%, and it's still not great today, even though it's gotten better. It still has a lot of problems, which we could talk about. But so that question of standards and the question of what constitutes an infringement of this IP law is incredibly important, because that determines a lot of whether you're seeing these negative things or not. If you have really ambiguous standards that are ripe for abuse, you will get a lot of problems. And patents have had those problems. Some of them, like I said, have gotten corrected. It's not as corrected as I would like, but there was a time period you could point to where it was like very bad, right? Much worse than copyright has ever been in any arena, really.
We'll get on to diving into patents a little bit more, but just before...
Yeah, we can hold that for later. I just wanted to point out that sort of idea of standards. That's thing one. I'm going to wait till you respond to that, and then I had thing two that I want to talk about for your stuff as well. But yeah.
Well, so that we don't get too deeply nested, why don't you give us part two?
Okay. So thing two was, one of the things I try to communicate to people as best I can is understanding what these systems are even doing. Right? Like why is there one of these systems at all in the first place? And the same is true, like I said, we talked about capitalism briefly, like Brent mentioned it, right? The same is true of economic systems. Like, what are these systems actually doing? And a lot of people focus on the things that they're used to, like the things that they interact with directly as the reason that the system exists, but that's usually false. So like most people are like, well, capitalism is about making money or profit or things like this. That's not true, and the same is true of copyright or IP. It's not about people owning a particular piece of thing. If it was, you just have it last forever, right? There would be no time limits on any of these things. If patent wouldn't run out in 20 years, if it was really property, you just own it forever. This idea is yours permanently, right? So even people who are very pro IP, I think, have to agree that it's not the same as property. We just call it intellectual property because that's sort of a similar idea, but it's clearly not exactly that, no matter who you're talking to, pro or anti, I think. So what these systems are supposed to do is allocate time, right? That is at bottom what we need these systems to do. They need to allocate time, and I'll just try to paint what I mean by that. So when I get up in the morning, right, there's two paths that I can take. One is I can do whatever I want. Like I literally just do whatever I want that day.
Yep.
Full stop. Right?
Yep.
The other is I can do some, like there's still going to be some of that, right? No human is a complete automaton. There's going to be some of what I want, but then some of what society is directing my time to because of the systems that they have put in place, right? Mm-hmm. The entire legal structure, civilization, is doing this. It's doing this in many ways. There's literal, like, malum prohibitum, right? There's things that are just like, you shall not do this. It can come from a religion, it can come from a government, and they're like, we're not doing this thing. And we have enforcement mechanisms to make you not do that thing sometimes. Like, we will haul you off, we will put you in jail, we will execute you at the extreme end. Like, there is, like, literally society is carving off those possibilities to anyone except criminals, right? Mm-hmm. Then there's softer ways in which it's being directed. And those are things like capitalism. It's saying, like, look, we are using this money supply and allocating it to people to purchase things, and then they make purchasing decisions. It's a diffuse organization system. It's different than socialism in that way. Socialism, someone at the top decided what you were going to do and told me what to do today, right? Capitalism, all the people in my society all decided to buy something that went through a corporation, which then told me to do something, right? So what these are their time allocation strategies. They're ways of allocating what I'm going to do at any particular time. And all of the byproducts of that are what people tend to associate with these systems, but that's what the system actually is there for. The only reason we need capitalism or IP law or socialism or any of these other things, only reason we need it is because we're trying to change that time allocation. And we know we need that because when we were all unallocated time-wise, none of this stuff works. Like, you can't build a computer with an unallocated time society. It will never happen. Not in a billion years it wouldn't happen, right? The reason we made these systems is because that's what they allow us to do. And the reason that capitalism predominates everywhere pretty much that builds complex systems was only that. It was because centralized decision-making was too difficult. Like, humans can't hold it all in their head. That's why. So capitalism is it's allowing that to be more distributed, and that turned out to be important. So that's why we still have that idea, right? That's why that's why we don't just have one single global command structure that runs the entire Earth. It's because we couldn't figure out how to do it. We tried, right? And we couldn't, right? So you still have these kind of things. That's why we have currency. That's why we have capitalism. That's why we have these things underlying those systems instead of just one global hierarchy that we organize ourselves into or something. It's more diffuse than that. And, IP law is there because we don't have another idea yet about how to bridge the fact that some things have to be done and others don't. Specifically, there is no milk in the refrigerator to drink if someone doesn't graze and raise the cow and make that milk. Period. Mm-hmm. There isn't an option for me to Xerox copy the milk, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So by definition, those systems work to allocate time because if they fail to produce the milk, there is no milk. Full stop, right? In intellectual property, we have a very different problem. Anyone can carbon copy the milk. We have the technology to make a perfect duplicate of the milk. So this is when people get really hung up, especially in the utopian mindset. They're like, I'm not stealing anything. I'm just copying the milk. Right? I'm just copying this song.
That's how I feel.
Right? Exactly.
I feel like we've got the Star Trek replicator. And
exactly. You got Star Trek. What's the problem? The problem is humans still consume actual milk. So to bridge these two systems, what you need is some reason why humans will spend a significant amount of time on the hard part of IP production. Not the easy part, right? The easy part is, okay, yeah, maybe I just have enough spare time because society is, structures like capitalism and things like this have been so productive that they're allowing me some spare time during the day. I don't have to do subsistence farming to survive like I would have used to, right? I will have some spare time in the evening, right, to produce this Rihanna song that I'm going to make or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so in their mind, they're like, well, that's fine. Maybe it's just spare time or whatever this, right? But 99% of the IP we actually care super deeply about, like the microphone that you needed, like how that was designed and the way that the circuit design was, the recording software that you actually needed for all these things, a lot of that stuff, tons of the underlying parts would never have been created if IP law hadn't existed. Because either they were made by people who were choosing to do these things. Like nobody starts NVIDIA in their spare time to build a GPU, right? They are rest entirely on IP law. Without IP law, that company doesn't make anything. They literally don't make anything. Everything's produced externally. As soon as they send the blueprint to TSMC, TSMC could just fab it and send it to you for free if there was no IP law. They wouldn't have to pay NVIDIA a dime, right? So the hard part of IP law is you have all of these things where we're trying to direct people to do the hard part of the work. And even when you look at things where people have done things that are free, like things like the Linux kernel, the amount of commercial IP reliant people who paid for that work to be done indirectly, either by paying engineers enough that they did it in their spare time, or paying engineers a ton of money who cashed out, or by colleges who existed on the back of the fact that they were getting tuition money in order to train people to go into high-paying IP jobs, all of that byproduct was the only thing that let us have the free part of the IP that we're looking at. So the problem is that bridge, right? The bridge between I need to actually make milk and I need to actually make IP is where these systems grew up around. And if one day, and humanity may get there, the milk becomes Xeroxable, so they're literally, like, that's it. We've crossed into post-scarcity. Everyone in the world somehow has this box that clones everything. Not just software, not just music, not just, video games, but everything. Then this discussion becomes moot. Because yes, IP law is only there as that bridge, and we don't have to care about it anymore. Like, it's simply irrelevant because time allocation is no longer an issue. Humans don't have a time allocation problem at that point, right? So what I try to tell people is when you are copying something that can be copied directly, I totally agree you're not stealing that thing. What you're stealing is the other person's time. IP laws have been set up to compensate people roughly the correct amount, actually, for how much time they spent. To give you an example, if someone was to make a video game, some of these, people spend a year, 2 years on a video game, very commonly, of their entire life, working full time on that video game. It's just more than one person, 4, 5, 6 people, right? The total amount of money you would have to pay for that thing is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars in today's economy. So if you bought a video game, it would be hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's what the actual cost is, right? Why is it $15? The answer is because we are literally doing that time allocation. We're saying the number of people who typically buy a video game on average, when multiplied by $15, ends up being enough to pay the number of people that typically work on an indie game for 2 or 3 years. So we all agree, even the people setting the price agree that yes, we are copying it. Yes, and when you steal the game, what you're doing is you're not stealing the game because nobody is charging the price it would actually cost for the game. What we're doing is charging the price that averages out to the correct time allocation for what we want and how much we value an indie game. That's what's going on. And so when you steal a video game, what are you actually doing? You're just increasing the price of that video game for all the people who did pay for it because they have to pay that amount in order to allocate the time to have the game made. If they didn't do it, it won't get made. End of story. That's pretty much it. That's the end of it, right? And so what these systems are designed to do is allocate time. And when they fail, what they fail to do is allocate that time properly, right? And we can look at the ways that it does that. But that's where you always have to start from. So the fact that you can make a copy of something and people point that, I'm like, okay, tell me you haven't thought about this without telling me you haven't thought about this, right? Because it's not about copying. Copying is not the issue. The issue is the bridge of time allocation that we have to do because no one's made the milk cloner. That's it.
So I agree with a great deal of what you said. It was reminding me of a lot of F.A. Hayek stuff about the like local knowledge problem, things like this. That's the reason that. So like the Soviet Union kind of piggybacked off the prices of goods in America because if they didn't have that reference point, there'd be no way to allocate you wouldn't know how much to charge, how many people to go and work in the coal mines. All of these top-down decisions are just impossible to do, and yet by magic, by the free market, you end up with pretty efficient allocation.
Well, and this is the hard part of that problem too. Is like this is why it's so hard to find. And I'm not trying to derail the discussion at all because I don't have any ideas here. I'm just saying this is why it's hard to find the successor. So like when everyone looks at it, they're like, okay, well, but we can easily identify that capitalism has these very bad failure states when too much capital ends up accreting in very small pockets, right? You end up with a very similar problem to the problem you have with socialism. A lot of top-down decision-making, very large corporations that don't allocate things properly, all this sort of stuff. The reason it's so hard to come up with that successor is it's like we don't know what's the thing that allows that diffuse decision making to work without the failure cases, and we don't know what it is. So that's why you look around, you see this hodgepodge. Where it's like we have a little bit of socialism, we have a lot of capitalism. There's a mix, and you're trying to like get that balance, and that's the best we got right now is that balance. That's what we got, and everyone's got it. Everyone does it, right?
I'm not sure that the system we currently have it's a very high threshold to beat because
exactly
in the case of video games or music or most of these cases, there's a very small number of games or artists who make almost all of the money. If you're a even fairly successful musician, you probably aren't making ends meet from a combination of touring and streaming. And if you're a medium-sized game studio, you're struggling to stay afloat at the moment. You basically got giant studios and then some individuals, and that middle ground is increasingly being hollowed out. And that's true in films. That's true. So everywhere yes, you're right. The way that copyright is applied is different between different media, but we see the same pattern again and again. So if you release a game and charge $15 for it, you're not going to end up neatly with the same amount of money that you invested. You're either going to fall flat on your face and make barely anything, or you're going to get many times what you originally invested and then probably go and try a few other projects. And I guess over time the remuneration
that's overstating the case, I think. The number of game studios that are successfully able to pay for their development costs is actually very high. And I guess I would say that I don't know exactly how to attribute that properly. My guess would be, again, this is why I say, like, you look at these things and it's easy to see the failure cases because it's like one of the big reasons that we have, I think, better success in the game industry with a lot more teams producing a lot more stuff and getting paid for it by comparison to, say, music, is because we have had some sort of benevolent forces in that industry. Now, capitalism certainly enabled those forces, so I would point that out. I'm not trying to denigrate it as a system by saying that, it requires, like, it was if it had been central decision making, forget it. Games are done, right? If the government ran the game, forget it. But like something like Steam, the effect that has had on the world and allowing games to be made by smaller people and be able to get paid, to be a reasonable return on making game, and actually the likelihood that a game sells 10,000 copies is surprisingly high, which is a number you can work with, compared to something like the music industry where it is just a grind and terrible. a lot of that comes down to like the music industry never had like a Gabe Newell. Like it never had someone who set up a successful distribution model where artists could get paid and it was centralized and users liked it and they wanted to support it and they never had that breakthrough, right?
It was a beautiful walled garden with expectations of paying for quality, and as you might expect, over time the standards are dropping and the amount that people are paying is dropping, and maybe we had a kind of fleeting glimpse of a system that works that's kind of collapsing. We've seen lots of people losing their jobs in the game industry in the last year, maybe.
But it was huge, but from a massive starting place, so much bigger than the music industry in terms of how much people were getting paid and how many of them there were and how much creative freedom there was for profitable projects. Right, like the game industry was starting from an amazingly high place, and that doesn't mean that
money than films.
It was remarkable, right? And so I think that again, like it's an incredible success story. As sad as it is to look back and go, like, okay, you got these troughs, and it's like, well, there was a peak, and I saw it, and now we ain't at that peak anymore, right? It's like that's unmistakable. But at the same time, it's like, no, if you actually look at the ground truth, and you're like, how much is this enabling? It is amazing compared to any other time. Like in the 1990s, you had to get a physical box on a shelf at a retailer. If you forget indie game development, like there's a little bit of shareware happening, and that's the only real success story there. It in 3D Realms or somebody, right? Maybe Epic. There's a couple, but now we're talking 10,000 indie developers out there who actually probably made back their dev costs or something like that. It's massive numbers compared to anything like it was before. It's a small part of the total games released because there's 10,000 every year on Steam or more, right? But it still is very remarkable. So when I look at that, I'm just like, again, I don't see an IP failure story there. I see a massive IP success story, but it's like one of those things where it got so successful that now we're kind of at this point where it's hard to sustain that. I mean, that was kind of an amazing run, right? I
wanted to make the argument the other way. So I've been talking about the reason that IP law is bad for the creatives, for the producers, the artists. I want to also make the case that IP law is bad for the consumer, the person listening to music, person playing games. I'd argue. So you mentioned Mario, or no? Who
did I?
Was it? No, who's this? Oh, the mouse, Mickey Mouse.
Mickey Mouse, yeah.
So, because of copyright, the only people who've been able for the last 100 years to iterate on Mickey Mouse and include him in other fun, wacky ways has been Disney, and they've done it in a bunch of interesting ways. They've made, they've made games and TV shows and plushy dolls, and they've kind of shown a pretty large amount of creativity, but I would argue less creativity and less flourishing of exciting creative artwork than would have been the case without copyright. And my example of this working really well would be the early days of hip hop, where it was all about sampling, and there was absolutely no shame in taking a break beat from this drummer that you sampled off there and an orchestral sample. The orchestra probably cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay all the musicians and rehearse, and you record it, and you pay for the physical record, and somebody just steals the information and mixes it with their own thing and puts it out. And the audience for the breakbeat plus orchestra is bigger at that culturally at that moment. There's more appetite for that mixed thing that was somebody's afternoon's worth of work than for either of those things by themselves, which, maybe the person learning to play drums had put in his 10,000 hours. The person mixing the two things together, it was maybe the first day that he'd bought his mixing desk. And yet, forget how much effort goes into producing the thing from the perspective of the guy who puts the record on, and at that moment it's really meaningful to him to hear these things come together, and it makes culture so much richer to have this melting pot where we can say, what if we had Minecraft but with Star Wars characters? Well, we don't have to wait for LucasArts to make a deal with Microsoft. We can just make
Oh, they'll all be in
ourselves.
Fortnite. Don't worry. Fortnite will have all of that. Probably already do.
Fortnite's the one mixing. That's the.
Yeah.
the
But yeah, keep
capitalism
that's a
produced
joke.
that.
I'm
I know.
totally following your argument, so that was just a joke.
point is,
because
if-
Fortnite's so ridiculous that way.
Yeah. So you're right that GTA 5 cost, hundreds
wanna
of
know.
millions.
I don't even wanna know.
To produce. The GTA 6 is going to probably be,
Yeah.
$500 million. I don't know.
Probably way more than $500 million.
So it's clearly great in a sense that we've sustained all of those people, the 3D modelers and rendering tech and these people have been sustained for years out of the products of IP. That's the case for IP. But who's to say that in a world where it was expected for people to contribute to a growing pile of free software, we wouldn't have GTA 6 or better as free software at this point. So, so putting aside the question of the creatives for a second, and just thinking about the life that we all live, the quality of life of being able to plug in your monitor and play GTA 5, maybe GTA 5 would be better. We'd have a higher mountaintop of games if it wasn't for IP protection.
Well, I guess I'd start with sort of the obvious retort to that, which is nobody's stopping them. So there's nothing stopping the community from making a $600 billion project. In your example, that's what they would do, right? In other words,
which is kind of what Microsoft. Well, I'd argue Minecraft has been that kind of collaborative thing, and it's the biggest game, arguably, in the world.
That was commercial, though. You had to buy it, right?
Yeah, but maybe if I looked into it closer, I would disagree with this. But I think the value of Minecraft has been in the mods rather than the base game. And it's the
right, but it also isn't. It isn't like a GTA level of stuff. I mean, it's block characters that run around.
No,
right?
I'm not claiming that there's billions of pounds worth of mods out there.
So all I'm trying to say is, if what you're asking is, well, would we just get GTA 6 just because it would happen? And the answer is no, because it could have. Like this whole time, there's nothing stopping people from getting together and building a GTA 6-like game. They just can't call it GTA 6, but GTA doesn't even have characters that repeat. So literally anything that you make that's a crime drama in a fully realized world with high-end rendering and lots of voice acting and all the stuff that you expect, nothing is stopping you from making that right now. So my question to you is, why haven't you? Why haven't you made if it just works and IP protection is not necessary, where's that product, right? And I would argue the answer is because there's no way, again, I'm just going back to time allocation, unless you have some expectation that you will get $700 billion back or $700 million or $1 billion back from this $500 million outlay, you aren't going to get that many people acting in concert. What they're going to be doing is each doing their own undirected thing. And that is what you see when you look at any of these projects. That is why the Linux desktop is such a bizarre world. It's because everyone's like, I'm going to make this thing that solves my problem, and this other person's going to make, right, and so on, right?
So how about the Blender model? There's a Blender Foundation, and it's commercial, I think.
Yeah.
They employ people full time.
Yeah, it's donation run. Yeah,
but they release their software for free, so they don't rely on IP. Is it possible that we could have more software being produced under the Blender model, which still results in people being paid full time for their work? They're being looked after as humans, as people.
Yes.
They're not having to do this out of charity. And I think Blender is a good example of actually their software is very professional. It's got strong UX design work. It's got clearly decisions get made that are cutthroat, creative decisions
Yeah.
that somebody has to say,
Yeah.
I'm going to be unpopular, but I'm going to do this. I don't see any reason that you couldn't have a quality project rather than the kind of, you're right, the meandering, undirected mess that a million people doing their own iterations would be.
And Minecraft mods the same way, right? It's this kind of it's a diffuse thing, and you could do that. What I would say is, again, it really depends on, and this is why I say, think of it in terms of time allocation. It's the way that it makes sense. How are you going to allocate this many people's time to acting in concert? So what I would say is Blender's a great example. Minecraft mods are examples. All of these. Linux Desktop is a great example. And what it is how big is the scope of this project? That is what determines it. So Blender, for example, can be very competitive because Autodesk, when you look at the market for an Autodesk product, it's actually not very large. This is like people kind of have a misconception about like how big the market for Maya is. Not that many people use Maya in the world, right?
Yeah. So it's sold as expensive commercial software.
It's very expensive, and they know ahead of time there's not that many people using it. The number of developers they assign full time to doing things like developing 3D Maya or Max is actually very small. It's not 1,000 people like GTA is. It's not even probably 100 people, to be completely honest with you. I don't know exactly what their numbers would be, but probably in the 10 to 50 range or something like that, right? The number of people actually doing active maintenance work on something like Maya. So when you look at something like an art tool, it's very plausible that an open source donation-based model can work there because you don't need to organize that many people, right?
Interesting.
And similarly, if I may, let's talk about Year of the Linux Desktop a little bit here, right? Because I'm the first one to say that it's kind of a disaster to use Linux. Like it is. I use it, I have it, and I run it on multiple machines here. But we see the exact same thing happening with something like Windows. Desktop, like there is no company putting 1,000 people on making a fantastic desktop and pushing on that. None of them care, right? Apple doesn't give a crap. They're all about their phone stuff. They're all about, that whole mobile and, their locked models and all that stuff. Microsoft couldn't care less. They're all about cloud. Like the Windows is not. No one cares, right? It's very clear. And so one of the things that I've said very many times is I'm like, the Year of the Linux Desktop will be brought to you by Microsoft. And I think it's really true because as it becomes a smaller problem, as it becomes if you need less and less people to organize all of their time and work together in concert to accomplish this thing, it becomes more and more plausible that a donation or patronage model or something looser, spare time oriented, will work, right? And so I do think that you can identify pockets where you're like, all right, and this is one of the reasons why, like we were talking about writing songs. It's one of the reasons it's one of the least interesting areas for IP. So if someone's like, we're getting rid of IP protection for music, I'm like, I don't think that's a good idea because I think I would like people to be able to make a living spending all their time making music. I think that's worth it for humanity. So I don't like the idea intuitively. I want them to have the same kind of protections on their work that other people do. But if you say it's like, okay, songs don't take that long to produce by comparison to the kinds of things that we're talking about. A video game takes way longer to make than a song, right? And so that's part of it, and there is a calculus there. So I wouldn't disagree with people who are looking at smaller things and saying, could we do something different with Smile? I don't disagree with that at all. But again, I just wanted to give sort of the perspective IP-wise there, right?
The historic patronage model could do quite impressive things. So you would, if you were a uber wealthy individual,
the pyramids,
like Caesar, you can get the Colosseum built. You can make a cathedral that takes 200 years to construct and probably does cost the equivalent of GTA 6 if you actually. Well, I don't know. The cost there is you only get one of them. So the way that works is that's the Elon Musk model. Some guy ends up with control of $100 billion, and they decide they're going to build rockets. Yeah.
Right? There's no question that something like SpaceX was not in his economic best interest. There's a million other things he could have done, right? But he just wanted to go to space. That he thinks that's important for humanity, and that's what's on the agenda, right? So that's where the money went, right? And that's what he spent his time getting set up and all those other sorts of things in terms of time allocation. That kind of patronage model supports a very, very few projects, right? So it's like, in terms of wanting that to run most things, you're taking a huge risk there, because and it's also at the whim. It's what did Elon Musk feel like doing, right? None of us get really a say in that outcome. Our money, the choices we made with our money were when he got rich back beforehand. Going forward, it was just his whims, right? And that's, I don't know, that's a pretty uncomfortable place to be. But I do agree that even that still exists to this day, because we do have like multi-billionaires, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, some of these, Jeff Bezos, and they do those exact kind of projects you're talking about, like building the pyramids because they wanted to. That still happens, right?
Maybe I'm too much of a hipster, but I don't think that the games that are being made with the intention of selling the most copies are the heights of artistic value. And in some ways, I'd be interested to see if there was a benefactor who was going to just fund a game and say, I'm going to give it away for free, and it's going to be something crazy. I think I'd be excited. I get what you mean about which project would you rather see in the world? Everybody working towards the thing that's going to be commercially viable, or everyone working towards the thing that's a crazy idea of a billionaire? And I kind of, a part of me wants to see the billionaire's random project rather than the like soulless COD 24 or whatever.
But that's not how those started, right? So again, okay, so let's go back to capitalism things, right? Mm-hmm. What is the idea behind profit in capitalism, right? People are like, so you make money and you buy a Lamborghini. It's like, no, actually, that's not why we have it. If the only reason that we thought it was useful to have profit in a system like capitalism was so that the people who did it could buy a Lamborghini, that would be the dumbest system. That would not work, and it would not be interesting. The reason is because you're hoping that when you see someone who is able to make a company that does something that people want to pay their money to for whatever reason, that they will continue to make good decisions with the profit that they have to start the new things, right? This is a very misunderstood aspect of capitalism. I don't know why, because it's like, it's the word capital right in the frickin' name. That's why it's called capitalism. Otherwise, it would be called free market or market economics or something, right? Like the reason we use capitalism is literally because of this investment model where we assume that people who got money will be more likely to know, not perfect at it, but more likely to do something useful with it if they accrued it in the first place than if you just randomly gave it to somebody, right? Now, you might disagree with that, but it's pretty hard to argue with, because usually when people disagree with that, what they're looking at is bad outcomes only. They're not looking at all the people who actually are successful investors getting things done. They're looking at the one, case where like somebody was like, oh, I just bought a giant mansion and I don't care and whatever, right? So yeah, has bad aspects of it for sure, but the other part is the part we actually rely upon. The part is we need, again, getting back to the general way that these system works. Again, problems with socialism structures, if you try to extend them all the way down, is you don't have voting, like democracy, is a very bad way to pick people who are effective at doing things. And if you don't believe me, look at the last N presidents. Right? Like, if you don't believe me, look at the last N rulers of your democratic country and ask yourself, was that the best person in this country to run the country? And almost nobody will say yes. Even if it was the person they preferred, they will probably not say it was the best person, right?
Yeah.
Now, some people will, and for those people, that's working great. But for most people, that's not the case. So what you're trying to do with the capital model is say, we're not going to have people vote with an abstract pitch. They don't go and listen to a bunch of people say blah, and then we all just vote who's going to start a company today, right? Instead, what we do is we buy things, right? And that money accrues some capital to the people who are more successful there, and then those people will then turn around and put that into other things that they're going to do, right? So we're trying to funnel the money to the most effective investors. That's the goal. The failure cases are myriad. Right? People then start squatting that system, and all they do is look for the things that will return the most money immediately, right? And there's all these kinds of short-term issues with it. So, like, why doesn't capitalism produce the perfect utopia? Well, that's why. Is because it's a very imperfect way of doing that capitalism. It's better than the other thing, the alternatives, but it's still got a lot of issues, right? And so my answer to your question is no, I don't want to see what you're talking about at all, actually, because most of the time, those games that you're looking at came out of a sustained period of those teams doing good work. The first Call of Duty was freaking awesome. The fact that we're many things down the line now, and you're saying this is kind of creatively bankrupt, it's like, okay, maybe, but millions, tens of millions of hundreds of millions of people enjoy playing that game tremendously, and they are reliably shipping it to them every year. Most teams, if you gave them $500 million, would produce nothing. Zero. Right? At that, they couldn't even fathom producing a game at that scale. If you gave me $500 billion and said it has to go to making one game, and that game has to look like it costs $500 billion, I'd be like, I'm lucky if I can make one. Right? One simple little tiny game. It's freaking impossible, right, for most people, including myself. It's very hard to design these things. And so when you look at these and you say like, oh, it's like, okay, yeah, but man, are you thinking about the actual alternatives here? We also have plenty of examples of billionaires, not billionaires, but like multimillionaires running it. Go look at 38 Studios. How'd you like that game? Answer, never came out.
Yeah.
Right? Never came out. A lot of these vanity projects, they never come out, or if they do come out, they're not very good, right? So I don't know. I disagree with that general underlying premise, because I think, again, it's that utopian mindset. It's like, well, surely if we were just all following our creative whims, it would all be better. It's like, no, it wouldn't. If it was, we wouldn't have ever made these systems. No one makes capitalism for fun, right?
No, true.
Yeah.
I think I share a lot of your sentiments. I'm just kind of have this deep curiosity about what if, I'd be really, it would be such a different way of organizing.
Make the milk cloner.
World.
Just someone makes the milk cloner, and then
once we're post scarcity, you're right. Then things really do change. Although
they do, they change pretty dramatically.
I'm not convinced we will ever actually reach that. I think that might always
that's a bummer.
Be in science fiction, but
we'll probably be dead before there's a milk cloner. But I'm still optimistic. Maybe some days there's a milk cloner, or at least that part of human endeavor is so automated and so streamlined that like it's this bare minimum of effort to keep it running, let's say. So it's not exactly a milk cloner, but it's really close. And if you had gone back 300-400 years and said to somebody, here's like, this is what there's this thing called a grocery store in the future, and this is what's in it, they would have been like, I can't even I have no idea how you ever did that.
But it's an interesting moment, because we've probably got past the point now where most people are making their money based on doing something physical.
Exactly.
Almost all of the work that we do is mental,
yes,
if we include driving. And I don't think it's crazy to say that even if you paused development on large language models and image recognition and all the AI stuff, that you could automate. If you said, okay, you can't progress machine learning any further, but you can continue to do new applications, you can classically implement as much software as you like. I think most people's jobs could probably be automated at the current moment. And then you say, okay, maybe new jobs will appear, maybe they won't. But at a minimum, that means that you could have robots out there producing all the goods and services that we enjoy. And we could choose. I mean, you mentioned earlier, every day we decide whether to follow our own decisions or to do something for the benefit of society and for others. Well, if 90% of the things that we allocate our time to for the benefit of society could be automated in 10, 20 years, does that mean that we've reached post-scarcity? And I'd say, based on human nature, almost certainly not. We will want more stuff. Rather than more free time, we would rather be richer. So, okay, we've got free milk. Fine. We've all got milk on tap. But now we all are yearning for whatever. Whatever the more exclusive item is that we somehow can't, that isn't on tap because it's harder to produce than milk, or we haven't automated that. They'll want that. Status-seeking beings, fundamentally.
Could be.
We're going to want our gold-plated Iron Man suit. And if that means working 40 hours a week, I'm going into the office.
Well, I'll bring Fortnite back as an example here, because it is literally free. You download the game and you play the game. You don't have to pay for anything, right? Mm-hmm. So that is one of the most profitable games that's ever existed. And the reason is literally what you're saying. If you want a pair of Air Jordans, I don't know if Air Jordans actually exist in Fortnite, but they probably do. If you want a pair of whatever the expensive sneakers are in Fortnite, you pay just to have it show up when other people see your avatar, they see it in those sneakers. And it literally, that's all it was. It's just that they will see your avatar in those sneakers. That alone is, a many billions of dollars a year in revenue game.
Yeah,
and you look at that, you're like, so yes, it's like literally, they're letting you play it for free. The game is free. You did not have to pay. You chose to pay just to have status.
And a lot of video games, if you break it down, are doing things that are people's jobs. Some of them in a more obvious way, if you're playing Truck Simulator.
Literally.
But if you're playing Banjo-Tooie and going around and collecting stuff, you could imagine your uncle asking you, do you mind if you spend this afternoon going and collecting these things in my field for me? And we just replicated that experience.
Or your trash. You're going around picking up the trash in the neighborhood, like the trash, the garbage truck, right?
So as much as we despise the 9 to 5, I think there's also a part of our brain that loves it. We want nothing more in life than a little circle that goes around, that we do a thing that was difficult in some way, and then we get a reward and we get a little spike of dopamine, and it continues. And if you were just provided with things, if you're just given
it's not satisfying. Like you still want more. If it's just there, it couldn't be worth anything, right?
Deeply psychologically damaging to be released from what has been, this post-scarcity dream. I don't know if it would actually be a dream if we reached it. I think we would try to reinvent an environment that was something we felt comfortable and familiar in, which would mean doing
it could
things that other people are telling us to do. Like, very few people actually want to be the dictator of the planet and have nobody above them telling them what to do. We actually are much more comfortable being further down the hierarchy.
Absolutely, And it's a really dark thought, because you kind of, I wouldn't call what you just said dark per se, but there's a darker version of that thought that I will put out there too, which is one very scary possibility is that the thing that everyone thinks of as the utopia is actually literally a disaster because of human nature, even without things like scarcity. And the reason I say that is because what if the only time mankind truly makes great monumental works is when there was a forced structure where people had to follow someone else's creative direction en masse, and without the requirement that they do that for their job, you never would get enough people, right? Now, I don't, the reason I couldn't say one way or another whether that's likely is because there's no question that you will get enough people voluntarily following individual. Religion is an example of that, right? There are voluntary followers en masse who do generally follow the instructions of people, and that does occur. But my question is, will they be the creative people? Because your most spiritual leader or your most convincing politician is not your most creative person. And so one of the things that these current structures are doing, because they are based on monetary compensation that a person needs and they have to go do it, right? It's a forced time allocation in the way that I said. One of the things that does is allow people who would not naturally be able to get that many people to do their thing the way they were trying to do it, to do so. And the scary thought is that if we free ourselves from the necessity to do that, because we now have the milk cloner, I'm going to use that from now on as the shorthand, as the milk cloner.
Right.
Does all of our creative stuff fall apart and we only accomplish small-scale creative projects? Because we still will. There's plenty of people who just left to their own devices will make something very creative. And there's probably plenty of small pockets of people, 5, 10 people, who will naturally get together. They really enjoy what they're doing. They love each other. They love working together. They make these great things. That we will increase. Almost certainly. Because now there's so much more opportunity for that they don't have to worry about where their paycheck's coming from, right? The question about the monumental stuff, I don't know. But I would, I'm not that worried. That wouldn't necessarily hurt me. Like if we were just small scale creatives, maybe that's fine. I don't necessarily need a pyramid to be made, right? So I don't know. It's hard to say. I'm just putting that thought out there.
GTA 6 won't exist, but we will have Minecraft,
which is maybe fine.
10.
And I don't.
What we need.
Maybe it's fine. I'm kind of sad because I like that GTA exists, but it's like it's not when we talk about that, right? That trade-off only. That's not a scary trade-off. I think most people would be happy in either world, right? The scarier ones is like, oh, we lose the capacity to build something like rocketry, like new technologies like that because they were so monumental and so much hard work. If that got lost, that's harmful to the human race because we need those things to survive, to get out of the solar system before it collapses, all these sorts of things, right? So there's like, there's sort of this super long-term humanity survival stuff. But in terms of like when we're just talking about the small scale, like, if we went to a world where you couldn't have GTA anymore, is that the end of the world? No. I'm not going to cry about that. If we just lose the ability to make those things, I'm not going to cry about it.
It is an interesting question. Could we have got to the moon based on amateurs iterating? Because and
voluntarily organizing together, right?
Because there are these very impressive YouTube channels of people who make, self-guided little rockets that take off and do quite impressive stuff. Now, they're massively benefiting from the fact that they already saw NASA do it and they already saw SpaceX do it.
And all the parts are already being manufactured, right? Like, it's really not as hard once you do that, right?
Doing a copy 30 years later at a smaller scale is not the same thing as doing it the first time. And clearly the original mission to the moon was this unbelievable moment you can see why people get conspiratorial about it because it's been so difficult to replicate so many years later with so many tools that would have theoretically should make it magnitudes easier to do now, and yet it's still beyond the capabilities of all but the most well-funded groups on the planet. But is it impossible? Because it's a bit like you were saying. The only reason that the Linux Foundation works is because of other IP-funded bodies putting aside some of their IP treasure chest and kind of reassigning it.
And all the people who are paid to work on it by companies that make their money off of IP law almost exclusively, right?
And I just can't. I think it's too complex of a question to really answer whether or not those projects could have happened by different means because say rocketry, what are the substantial things that got us to the moon? One part of it was an enormous amount of deep technical understanding of physics and engineering and kind of the experiment and progress, the kind of R&D aspect. If you could bottle the how-to and send, if you could send back a package through time that gave you the complete technical workouts of how to build Apollo 11, was it, that went to the moon? Mm-hmm. Then and you could just package up. Here's how you're gonna solve this, but here's how.
Right. Like here's the whole thing. Just we have the whole. Right. We have everything. Like we gave you everything you needed.
We've given you that. Yeah. We've given you all the understanding that you need. Now you just have to build it. That kind of knowledge can accumulate over a much longer period of time, but in small steps. So part of what but
I would point out that's the easy part of the problem.
Okay.
By far.
So the other thing is, okay, suppose you've been given the complete technical work. I mean, we probably have it, right? You could probably download the Apollo
probably. Yeah, I don't
schematics
know, but,
and you're going to have to build, what are the wheels are like the size of a 5-story house. The thing that wheels the rocket to the. You have to buy up enough land so you can have the rocket fumes destroying everything within a 10-mile radius. So there's an enormous amount of like you were saying, human time allocation.
Exactly.
That has to all happen in one place at one time to build this thing.
But not just that.
To launch a rocket.
The whole, like, if you look at the Apollo program, one of the reasons that it happened when it did, because let me change that narrative a little bit. So you look at when can these things be accomplished? Well, the Apollo program was not, a sort of a capitalist endeavor at all, right? It was government was like, we're going to massively incentivize this activity
Which
here
is kind of
because
hilarious.
we want to, right?
As they like, we're going to show how great capitalism is and how thriving the West is by doing a government project.
Exactly. And so when you think about it, you're like, okay, so to arise naturally, even in a IP protected market economy, it actually happened, the ability to go to the moon, which I think SpaceX, if they were really trying to go to the moon, probably could have by now, if that was their actual priority, let's say. The ability to do that in sort of the private sector in any sense where the private sector is directing it, right? Because SpaceX obviously gets funding from the public sector as well for, to do missions for them and all this other sort of stuff. But I'm talking about in terms of the knowledge base and production and direction of what's happening to occur entirely in the private sector, it really took another 60 years, right? So it was 60 years early by the government saying, we're going to do this and what does that tell you, right? Well, it tells you exactly what I said. Humanity, we didn't actually prioritize that. We were not going around spending our money in ways that were like, we got to get to the moon, right? We were spending our money on things like cars and food and right. So it would not naturally arise because it's not something that collectively people would put their money towards. So had to do that. And it took another 60 years before randomly, because again, capitalism is a very random system, right? That's how it works. It does randomized. It's a very large randomized system with some feedback loops. So it took another 60 years before someone randomly who happens to want to go to space randomly accumulated enough money because of market pocket dynamics to then be able to make that happen mostly in the private sector, right? And so that's a huge time gap in modern thinking, 60 years. And who knows if he ever would have done that or even wanted to do that or even thought about doing that if the government hadn't done it first, hadn't decided that we're going to do this and forced the market economy basically in that direction by providing all of this money just from above, right? Mm-hmm. They basically took your tax dollars and said, we're taking away, United States, we're taking away your choice about how you will spend this money, and we're telling you it's going to the moon. Some percentage of your tax dollars, it's going to the moon. And it's like, okay, and that's what happened. So when you look at that, it's also worth noting, it's like, it wouldn't have happened at that time either if it hadn't have been essentially what we're talking about, sort of the patronage model, like the pyramid model is the only reason that happened in the 1960s.
There's an effect with technologies where they get unlocked. You can't do A before B.
Yeah.
And the space race is credited for a load of inventions that we use every day, like ballpoint pens and random things. You could argue that we went to the moon kind of unnecessarily, pointlessly early, and if we had just waited, we could have done it a lot cheaper, right? We could have had the ballpoint pens come up organically.
Maybe.
And perhaps
maybe.
On the planet at any given time, there is a certain number of people who are just unstoppably inventive. I mean, that would be my observation of human nature, is that the people who are doing innovative stuff, I work with people who are doing innovative stuff every day. And I don't think they're doing it because of a paycheck. I think that most of them are doing other inventive things in their free time on top of the thing that
they're not doing it because of a paycheck. They are able to do it because of a paycheck. That's the critical part, right?
Yes, that's true as well. Yeah,
that's the critical part, because otherwise they would have to go do something else, right? If they couldn't get paid a reasonable salary to do what they're doing, they would have to go milk a cow or something, right? So this is why I say, it's critical to say, it's like, yes, I agree, but there's the time allocation thing. because we have the structure we currently have, a tremendously large number of people who do want to work on rocketry are working on rocketry. And that would never happen if we were just randomly sitting around, right?
Had those people not been allocated to the Apollo program, that money and those people would have been released. Now, the way that gets redistributed is pretty impossible to know, because it's money going back into kind of random American.
But it would be distributed for something more practical.
But they
right. Like,
maybe, or perhaps those people, because they are, I'm arguing, unstoppably creative people, engineers. They would have rather than going to milk a cow, they would have been doing. I think maybe not all of them, but a subset of them at least, maybe more people would have ended up working on different problems, and maybe we would have had, I don't know, the LED lights rather than old-fashioned lights earlier, or something. You know, just technology would have kind of developed in a different order, and because going to the moon in the 60s was so obnoxiously soon, it cost us way more. Our allocation of human hours was terribly inefficient, and we would have been more advanced today than we are if only it hadn't have been for this kind of interruption.
It's really hard to say, right? Like, those are the kind of counterfactuals. It's like, it would be awesome if we could run, right? Because it's certainly, well, I can say one thing in support of your argument, which is certainly no one would disagree with, or I don't think people should be disagreeing with a weaker version of that, which is that we can certainly find government projects of maybe not exactly the same magnitude, but similar magnitude, where it's pretty easy to say that this was a gigantic waste of all of these people's time, right? So the Apollo program is kind of the best case. It's one where they put all these public funds towards something, and a tremendous amount of very valuable sort of information and organization and ideas about how to even run projects. Like, project management advanced considerably with Apollo 11. It's one of the things people, I think, probably underestimate, right? So a lot of that stuff we can point to and say, like, wow, well, I don't know if you would have gotten, like, this is a pretty good example of a government program that had a lot of payout for what it actually cost. And, you know, but we can find a lot of examples of government programs not so, right? Like, I mean, it's easy to find like something where it's like, yeah, they were supposed to make, you know, this tank or something, and it just was a disaster and nothing really came out of it, or, you know, things like that. Where, so Apollo 11, I don't know how well much of an argument you can really make on your side of that, but Apollo 11 is the best case, pretty much. Right? Like, it doesn't get better than Apollo 11, really, when you're pointing at government projects and saying, how well did this work out for taking decision-making away from the public and putting it into some government idea that what they're going to do. At least in the U.S., Apollo 11 would kind of be a zenith. So it's the hardest argument for you to make.
Yes.
If you want to make that argument, just move down a few projects. Move down, go down to some of the worst projects. Go find one of the boondoggles, because there it's obvious. Like, yeah, that was...
True. Yeah. The advantage of arguing it on hardest difficulty setting,
Steelman,
is it makes it clear what I'm saying, because it's very easy to say, look at this inefficient use of government resources, and then the answer is just, okay, but the solution is to have better control over inefficiencies. And I guess in a sense what I'm saying is that those monumental projects that you were describing as kind of, we would lose them forever.
Or might. We don't know, right? The kind of the point of this hypothesis is like,
and I guess what I'm saying is perhaps those projects didn't need to be so monumental, and it was impressive that they happened when they did, but they would have been like trivially easy in comparison if they were just tackled 200 years after the fact. I mean, the cost.
Right.
You could imagine that a team of. Okay, let's suppose we go. Let's do a sort of sci-fi hypothetical. We go forward 30 years, so it's not so crazy. And we have robots that can do a bunch of the industrials. We can move concrete around remotely, and we can, we've got super advanced AI that can write software for us in a jiffy and all this kind of stuff. You could imagine in that circumstance that if somebody just has enough money to buy the resources that they need, like the land,
the raw materials,
concrete, the raw materials, they can get the rare metals or whatever, that they could get to the moon with a team of 100 people.
Yeah. I mean, I think the problem that you run into, like you said, was it's this you're constantly pushing the manifold back. And the problem is until you push it all the way back, you're still not into whatever the utopia is. Cause how, when you said, as long as they have enough money to buy the raw materials, how are we allocating this money in the future where everything's a robot that's doing stuff? And like, how did you get that share of resources? Because it's still going to be, again, maybe we get to the real post-scarcity, and that's when we have literally the milk cloner, right? Like somehow it's just pulling dark matter from the ether and generating the milk out of nothing. Who knows, right? And I would point out that even then, even at that point, you haven't solved the bad actor problem. Like, what about the dude who's just griefing everybody by replicating billions of milks everywhere, right? So we still have all these have all these legal problems, and how are we going to structure society to prevent bad actors and all this stuff. So anyway, it's complicated, but yeah, even at that point, you still have this question of like, how's it going to do? But to your point of, well, let's say we're still running capitalism, we're still running IP law, we're leaving these things mostly in place. But what we're saying is the government is not going to push forward this sort of thing. So, China's not going to have a communist party anymore. They're going to just have generally their current market, and they're going to let the people decide mostly. The U.S. is not going to undertake any of these big projects, blah, 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 because all the government stuff delevers, and they're like, we're just running bare capitalism. How long does it take before someone accidentally gets to the moon, right? And I think it's a really interesting question, and I have no idea. I mean, this is a podcast where we're shooting the shit, right? I mean, I don't know. Yeah. These are things you can't prove and can't measure. You're just kind of looking at them going like, I usually try to point out the places where I think people oversimplify, which is what I've been doing this entire podcast. I'm just going like, but what about this? What about that? But really, like, who knows? It could very well be you're always looking at things and going like, okay, if we do this now versus we do this later, which one was going to be more efficient, and who knows? And then there's also the question of like, if the giant Earth-killing event happens 100 years from now, then pushing things back 60 years, making things is huge, right? Is a massive difference. If the Earth-killing event doesn't happen for another 50,000 years, then 60 years is completely irrelevant. So if it would have happened in 60 years later, 100 years later, no one would care. It literally won't matter for humanity's survival. We're getting off the planet either way. You easily could have just let it run longer, right? So I think that's also a problem is we don't have that future knowledge. We don't know when life on this planet might get forced to cease to exist, even if humans don't end it. Even if there's no nuclear apocalypse, no environmental catastrophe, no nothing. It's like we don't know when some really horrific unexpected astrophysical event happens that we aren't prepared to handle. So at some point, you do end up in a situation where you're like, I don't know, 60 years could have mattered. I hope it doesn't, right?
That is assuming that the project of getting to Mars was brought forwards by getting to the moon sooner.
Which we don't know.
Which may not be the case. Yeah. And it looks to me like the private sector has got to kind of the 1950s level of space technology at the moment.
Well, so reusable rockets are way ahead of anything NASA ever had. So but, I don't know about that.
Yes. I guess.
Way ahead.
I mean in the sense that it's become a priority. It's become something that the private sector is interested in to get people into space at this point. And it took the private sector to the point of having reusable rockets before it was financially viable. And that's why there was 70, 80 year lag. But yes, like you say, 80 years lag could be disastrous.
And it
On the
still
other
is.
hand,
It's still a little bit public sector too, right? Because again, there is still like NASA needs to launch things, and there was public. There's some public participation in that. So even this wasn't like it's not 100% private sector. Even so, right? But yes.
but I mean, I think there were private companies giving money to NASA for launching their satellites into space.
That's
so
true
it goes
too.
both
Yeah.
ways.
It goes both ways, and also the private sector very well could have done it. Like the private sector isn't going to turn down government money, right? But it's possible that the private sector would have found other ways if that wasn't available. They're going to take it if it's there, but that doesn't mean they actually needed it. A lot of people conflate those two things. Like you don't actually know that they needed it, but they are definitely going to take it if it's there because you'd be stupid not to, right? But yeah. So anyway. Putting that aside.
To finally circle to patents.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
So my comment on patents is really that the proposed reason that patents were invented was so that useful technologies would be the know-how would be shared. It was actually primarily put in place as a way for people to find out how each other did their cool stuff.
Yeah.
With the agreement that you get a little bit of exclusivity first. Now, my job, I work for a tech consultancy, so we are exactly the kind of people who theoretically should be going and looking up patents in order to decide how to tackle a cutting edge problem.
Yeah.
And we're explicitly told
not to
ever look at a patent because if you're sued and you can prove that the engineer had seen the patent, you're much more likely to lose the court case.
Well, no, that's not it. It's actually it's just about damages.
Oh, the payout is bigger.
Much bigger, 3x.
So the consequence is that the system puts a slight damper on innovation because you might decide not to sue not to do something if you find out that there is a patent, but it never results in people gleefully searching through patents to find out how to do things.
And the patents are awful. So even if you found the thing, it's going to take you like 7 years to decipher the terrible way that it's written because it's.
I mean, it's more or less written in the form of here's the thing that you were trying to accomplish with no real guidance about how to do it.
Exactly.
It's like I already knew that's what I was trying to do.
It's like thank
all
you.
I've discovered here is that I can't do it. I know that it's possible. I now know that it's not legally possible.
I usually, as you saw earlier, like there's a lot of things that I think are good about copyright law. So I'm pretty positive on copyright law. Are there things I would like to see fixed? Absolutely. In summary of just like wrapping up that part of it. But I'm actually pretty positive. I think it's done a lot more good than harm in helping creators succeed. And I think people vastly underestimate the damage that would have been done had we not had it. That's my opinion on copyright. Patents, I can't get there. I don't have a lot of defense of patent as IP law being good. I can understand certain problems that I think are hard to solve and that it's unclear what you would do without something like patents. And that's kind of like I spend a tremendous amount of time figuring out the perfect design for this thing. And now I need a few years of selling that to recoup that design time. But as soon as I start selling it, people will make the exact same thing and then I won't get paid. I understand that problem. And I do think that problem is a problem worth thinking about for the human time allocation reason that I've said for all the stuff we've been talking about. You do want to incentivize people to spend a long time figuring out hard problems. And so I understand the niche role that patents could be, or I would even say that pro-patent people point to. It's not nothing. Right. So there is something there, and it's worth acknowledging that we would have a problem there. That could very well be a problem. The problem I see with patents is in their implementation as they currently exist. It's just unworkable. Like it is a literal practical complaint from me. Like putting aside the theoretical thing that could be being solved, even if you argue successfully to me that they are solving that problem, I still just look at it and like there are so many practical problems with what you've created that I don't see any argument for keeping the system as it is now. It has to move forward. The reason I say that is baked right into the first thing you opened with, which is I'm incentivized not to look at what the patents are, right? So why is that? And like I said, the reason for that is because if there's evidence that you knew that the thing was patented and you used it anyway, it's triple damages in the lawsuit. Now, why is this interesting to me? Why am I bringing that up as my first point? That means that the presupposition of patent law
is that people will be discovering it.
Is that you didn't copy it. There's damage. The default damages are you independently came up with it.
Yeah.
Right? So to me, that's a huge red flag because I'm like, look, I can't, like, I'm going to sit down and solve this problem the way I'm going to solve it. I can't control, I don't even know because of the world as being common. Maybe back when patents were originally conceived, maybe they were thinking along the lines of, well, everyone knows roughly what the different ways are we make a shoelace. So you know whether you're violating someone's patent or not, generally speaking. So this isn't really an issue. And the only thing we're talking about here is, well, if you looked at someone's shoelace and copied it, we just want to know if you knew there was a patent or not. We know that you were copying someone else's idea because everyone knows what all the shoelaces are or whatever, right? Maybe that made sense in their world. I don't know. I don't want to like claim that the people who originally came up with this stuff were malicious. But in today's world, it's absurd to think that anyone has any idea whether their inventions infringe other people's patents. There's no way they're ever going to know. There's billions of patents. Even searching them is almost impossible, right?
So that we can fully flip on to opposite ends of this argument. I'll make the pro patent case.
Okay.
Which is
pro patent or pro the thing I was just talking about, because that's an aspect of patents, but
well, more broadly that pharma companies make their money because they have patents. So if you abolish patents, then you would be putting an enormous amount of medical researchers out of a job, and we would stop progressing our understanding of disease, and the entire medical industry operates on nothing but patents. It's a fully IP supported, and I think healthcare very good for the world. So if we just scrap patents without a care in the world, are we not going to result in a screeching halt in our medical progress?
Well, and also, like I said, broadly speaking, this is why when I said, okay, there's this underlying problem of we spent all this time making something, but it's fairly easy to make a very similar thing once you've seen it. How do we get paid back for that time? That's really also the pharma case. It's the same case, right? It's like they had to spend all this time researching, and for pharma going through like all kinds of ridiculous like FDA processes and all sorts to like prove the thing was safe and all those sorts of things, right? But then at the end of the day, we can chemically analyze what they output very trivially and just start manufacturing. Like that may be very easy because it's, sometimes the pharma thing that they actually develop is the production process, in which case that's safe because they could just not tell anyone how they're doing it. But if the thing is, it's like, what is the actual thing we're manufacturing? It's an instance of that case I was saying. And this is why I say, like, I do appreciate the problem that's being, that needs to be solved there. And I think it applies to more things than just pharma, certainly. The problem, like I said, is the current structure is not tenable for all of those reasons that I said. So I feel like we have to move that one forward. We have to move patents forward into the future. I think they're a bit stuck in the past. And I also think, like, at a minimum, it feels like there should have to be some proof of theft. Kind of like in the copyright case where we're kind of saying, like, if you're completely unaware of the thing that you were accused of copying, that's a much harder case to win. Whereas in patents, like I said, that's not even relevant. That's a damages phase. I said, no one even cares if you knew. During the entire patent litigation, it's only at damages where we actually care, right? And so to me, I think that's a big missing picture. Because, like, for example, if two pharma companies are both working and they happen to come up with a very similar drug, I don't think that there should be I don't think whoever filed the patent first should get it, because they both need to get paid back for all that research time, right? So to me, what we're trying to disincentivize is shortcutting that R&D phase. We're trying to disincentivize companies from not paying for R&D and just leeching off of what other people have done, because then we will lose the funding for R&D. So I say, like, at a minimum, could we get to a system where some level of proof of at least nominal copying was occurring before we would ever consider this a violation of a patent, right? Like, the person that's at least have seen the product, right? At this point, that's not required. Right. And so to me, I think maybe, could we get there? Because I do agree with what you're saying. Like, I'm not prepared to sit here and say that if we got rid of patents, there aren't certain industries whose business model collapses. And I don't want to be the same guy as on the copyright side where there's like, and then something magically happens, right? Because we don't know. So I am fairly anti-patents in their current incarnation, but I'm not prepared to say that eliminating them completely is actually a solution. It may be in some industries, because some industries may just really not need it because they have copyright protection. They have other IP laws that work better for them. I think software is an example where IP laws, I think, work better than patents. So I don't know that we should have patents in space. Other industries may simply not have, if without something to fill that void, the whole thing collapses. And so I don't know. But yeah, some proof of theft. Could we get that maybe? I would like to see some movement towards some rectification on things like that.
In the UK, we have the National Health Service. So it always strikes me that most of the money that gets paid to pharma companies in the UK to pay for the expensive drugs that are funding the research is already coming from a shared pot. Can't we simplify this and just pay for the research? Wouldn't it be a better world if all of the drugs prices were lower, but the taxes just went to funding research, and then as soon as you discover something, it's cheap and available, and we mass manufacture it instead of having the price be skyrocketing and eventually coming down? We would save more lives for the same cost.
I mean, again, you have this problem of human time allocation. I keep coming back to that, and it's like all of these systems are operating in ways that are currently allocating time at some level of quality, right? It's like, and some of them are doing very well, some of them are doing very poorly, and you get all kinds of arguments on both sides. Some people will say like, oh well, one of the reasons that a purely free market approach isn't working in these sectors is because the government has too many compliance loopholes compliance requirements, and the FDA and all this stuff. So it's hugely expensive to bring a new drug to market. So there's very little competition that can happen, and you have to have all this backloading of R&D. You have to bake in all of this money you're going to make back to account for all that and all this sort of thing. And really, at the end of the day, what I say to a lot of those things is like, when I look at a system like that, I'm like, this is incredibly freaking complicated. And all I can tell you is that the current system produces something at a reasonable quality level. If we want to make changes, we can try some, but I think anyone who tells you they know exactly what's going to happen when we move it more into the public sector, move it more into the private sector, move it more this way, move it that way, I think they just probably are underestimating the complexity of the problem, right? Because these things, it's always tempting to look at a current solution and go like, well, it would be easier if we just did X. And it's like, at this stage in my life, I'm often like, I don't really know.
Yeah.
I never know. And there's so many things you can discount, including bad actors. Like, a lot of people fail to account for the fact that some of the inefficiency in the system is there because it's grown up with bad actor influence all over it. And people are like, well, if you just hadn't had people doing this, then it would be fine. It's like, yeah, but people will do that. We need the system to be resilient to those problems. And so, we don't have a choice. So, I don't know. I don't have any answer. But for pharma, I'm completely non-knowledgeable about it. So I couldn't give a recommendation myself, right?
Yes. And your point is extremely useful and very broad, actually, that I think a lot of people's lives would be improved if they took a little bit more time to recognize that the problems that they're putting so much thought into are not things that they have any influence over. And so they might land on the right answer. They're acting as if the world is asking them to solve the problem, but it doesn't matter. You could have the wrong opinion. You could be completely 100% back to front and have maybe the current system is actually already optimal, or maybe it's a complete disaster and any change would be an improvement. Either way, it doesn't matter because you have no influence over the problem. So I guess I mean I often think that with regards to politics as well, or current affairs in general, and then you end up thinking, well, is it a waste of time talking about it? What's the point? I mean, in the case of IP stuff, it was quite enjoyable. It has some tangential, practical applications. There might be becoming more knowledgeable about the subject might affect the way that you act as an individual. And I suppose maybe the conversation, a million individual conversations bubble their way up to people of influence and they can make better decisions. I tend to think that the decisions, the way that things get made is a mixture of people in powerful positions doing stuff for their own interests, bad actors, but also perfectly reasonable, efficient choices that just settle into position because other things get tried and it's not a good solution. So that gets eventually you land in a place that is not optimal but good enough, better than it's kind of a local minima or whatever.
Well, and I think it's really worth changing your mindset, in my opinion, when you look at these complex systems, to realize that they are so large and there's so much detail there that what you're seeing is the fact that it's working as well as it is truly remarkable, and your idea about how to fix it is almost certainly wrong. That's not saying that we don't need to try, but it's like we will have to try many things. We will have to try many, many things before we progress beyond our current sort of like, the current best, this much socialism, this much capitalism model, right? Because it's like no matter what you think would just be better, it won't, because you're almost certainly wrong, right? And the reason for that is because they're so complicated. I come at it from that perspective because this is something that programming has trained me pretty well on. Even on a completely deterministic system, with a thing that I've written entirely myself, after even a few years of work on that system, can I hold the entire thing with all of the subtlety in my head? No, I can't. And that was just me on just one system of complexity nowhere near the size of a country with a functioning economy and religious systems and political systems and all of these independent actors making decisions every day. So when you look at something like that, you're like, predicting weather, for even looking at another example that worked somewhere else and trying to import it, even that is fraught with peril because you have no idea which conditions allowed that. Can I move this thing that worked well in Japan to something that works well in the US? You have no idea, right? And it's never sufficient to sit around saying, well, if everyone just did X, if everyone was just more this, more that. It's like, no, the humans in your country are the ones that they are. And the system has to work with them as they are. Nobody is going to go suddenly become different because you thought it would be better if everyone did X. And so the systems that are currently working are really things to marvel at, as much as I might any day have a complaint about one of them, right? It's marvelous. It's remarkable this thing works every day. And then it moves forward every day. In a lot of cases, sometimes to a better place over 10 years where people have more prosperity, more people are above the poverty line, or more people got a television, this crazy invention, or whatever, that whole pipeline you look at, it's remarkable that it accomplished that. And so it's always worth coming out with some humility that's hopefully that's been a thread that's been through all of my answers here. It's just like some humility, the fact that like, look, guys, this is really effing hard. Really effing hard. And it's way harder than anything we deal with on a daily basis. And frankly, you know, I make a lot of mistakes when I'm programming. Okay? And that's the easy problem. So changing IP law, cross my fingers, right? It's hard. It's really much more dangerous than people think. Yeah.
I think that's the voice of experience. That's a mature perspective. It's funny how younger, greener people coming into a team will often have very strong opinions.
Oh, I'm sure that was me too when I was 20.
Yeah,
right?
I was saying, but, you know, perfectly well reasoned within a certain context, completely obviously correct, and they're sort of pattern matching the thing that they know onto the new environment that they find themselves in, and failing to understand kind of proportions and kind of dependencies and complexities and you know, priorities. If you think a particular, well, one good example I think is a community of people who are solving the same problem with the same language and the same tool set have a much more constrained question. And if they then get into a debate on a topic with people from a different community working on a different problem with a different tool set, they are completely talking past each other, because from one perspective, there's plenty of experience and reason that their argument is correct. And the other team, or the other group of people who all respect each other, who all know how many decades of experience they all have in their sub-problem, are vociferously arguing the opposite. And they're both, from a perspective, very rationally confident that they're correct. And the difference is that they're operating, you know, this decision is really useful in combination with that and that and that. And the other team are completely the opposite way. So I totally back your repeated call for humility, and I think it's something that I feel like I'm still in the, you know, maybe I'm approaching the middle of my career or something like that. So I know I will, if I could talk to myself in 20 years, I'm sure I'm still carrying a lot of bravado about understanding things that I will be kind of disenchanted from. But
it's fine if it's I'm never one, like, you know, I'm the kind of person who's like, I'm totally fine that, you know, if Linus Torvalds is going on some rant, right? Like, I'm not the kind of person who thinks that everyone should be. I mean, if I was, I'd be a hypocrite, right? But like, I'm not the kind of person who thinks that people should be falsely humble about something. Like, if they really know this thing and it's their thing, and they have really demonstrated that they know what they're doing, I don't think they have to go around sugarcoating it for me, right? Like, so I would never want to be misunderstood thinking that's important, because I'm the opposite of that. I'm like, yeah, go ahead, like, rant on, go nuts. I'm just trying to say, like, at some point, we all have to know there is no human smart enough to conceptualize a system perfectly beyond a certain scale, right? Yeah. And for whatever scale that is, I can guarantee you a country is that scale. Like, so I don't know where that line becomes, you know, I don't know if it's 10,000 lines of code, 100,000 lines of code, or a million lines of code, or whatever. But country, which, by the way, has all of things running millions of lines of code in it, right? So it's
by definition,
more complicated, right? So country is that size. There's just no question that is that size. And so at best, what you're doing when you analyze something, IP law, whatever, you have to be very careful to say, here's my analysis, here's the thing, change I think would make a benefit, and it has to be of, let's see what we can do to try this out, right? It can't be, and I'm just right. Like that is not possible because I guarantee you don't have the ability to actually say that. You may have a very good idea and we maybe really should try it, but we have to figure out a way to do that carefully. And you have to go into it, and this is the most important part. You have to go into it prepared to be wrong. Because one of the biggest things that I see that's a problem, and it, when we do this in programming, the costs are much less. I go into some system and, I'm going to make these changes. It's going to be great. Oh, it turned out it didn't. I just reverted it, right? That mentality doesn't play out very well in the larger stage anymore because, in the political world, people are very incentivized to stick to their policy, pretend the policy worked, even though it doesn't, cook the number, right? There's a lot of could be facts. So this mentality that we have these days, that the way it works is we politically argue for more police, less police, whatever it is that you're saying, and then you have to stick to that even when it was obvious it didn't work, or that it's obvious that this was the wrong place for that, or it's obvious that there was a complexity we didn't get, right? That is a huge impediment to progress because what we need is people to go like, okay, we've analyzed this thing. Here are some steps that we think would give us a useful informational change tradition. We're going to honestly see what happens when we make the change. That's the only way we can really get the progress. Because otherwise, if it's too dogmatic and you're too dug in, either you never try the thing that you needed to because you were too dogmatic, or you tried the thing and kept it even though it sucked, right? And either one of those leaves us in a bad, like you said, local minima, right? Or it leaves us in a bad place on the curve that we could have gotten to a better place if we would just been willing to treat it like what it is, which is a gradual sort of hill climbing problem where we can only sort of make these small local changes because, giant, massive changes are out of the question unless you're founding a new country. Like you have to be going through a revolution to be doing that. Any functioning country would be absolutely nuts to wipe out everything and restart, right? So you're always talking about making small changes to see how you can improve. You have to have a tremendous amount of humility and be willing to accept failure to make it work, I think.
It reminds me of the attitude they have in medicine that, is it Hippocrates, the primum non nocere?
The Hippocratic Oath
first
concept
do no
thing?
harm.
Okay, yeah.
If you're gonna take a system that is doing something right, and as much as I've been trying to make a case against IP, I will admit that the system as it currently exists seems to be doing something right. There seems to be, we still have music, we still have games, we still have medicine.
And more of them than we've ever had. In all of human history, we have more of all of those things than we've ever had, right?
And by changing the system completely, we run the risk of making the whole situation a lot worse. So if we understand the system confidently, we can make a sweeping change. But I don't think anybody should have the confidence that they understand the system. And so what you were saying follows. The best you can do is learn, do experiments, gradually growing confidence that you really do understand the system, and then you can act without doing harm. We don't just cut open, if you're not a surgeon and you suspect that your family member needs a open heart surgery, you don't kind of I've got a pair of scissors. I'll give it a go. Even though open heart surgery might be the correct answer, you've got to be pretty confident that you're also the person to implement it.
The skill to pull it off, right? Well, and I would like to also, again, hopefully I've made this clear so far, but I'll just sort of put on top of that. I also want to make sure people understand that like none of that should be interpreted as a suggestion, or none of what I've said should be interpreted as a suggestion that IP law is perfect, right? That's because like I'm saying, no, I see very clear problems with it, many of which I mentioned, especially with patents, being one where I think there's a serious problems, at least for certain industries. I think we can point to very serious problems. And so the best of both worlds is understanding that the system right now is functioning way better than you think it is, but also understanding that without the willingness to open-mindedly try things that we think we've analyzed, we will never progress forward. And we never would have gotten to the system, which I think I said before here, we never would have gotten the system we had today. So we do need the mindset of these are problems, we need to fix them. The problems, we just have to go into it with a little more understanding that a lot of those things that we decide to try are actually worse. So you have to be willing to say this is experimental. These systems are accomplishing a lot of things that you don't see because they've been accomplished, right? And the parts that are working, might be accidentally undoing. Right. And so we just have to have that awareness and ability. But can we improve IP law? Absolutely. Like I have no doubt in my mind that there is a better version of IP law from where we are today. I just want to make sure that we get there by appreciating the things that it is actually doing well so that we don't accidentally throw it all away and get into an even worse situation. Because I think there's way worse situations that we could be in today, and people don't appreciate it. They think IP law is the only, like, just creating problems. Like, I really think that's a very, very incorrect assessment of what it is.
It's as if we were in a rickety wooden boat with loads of holes in it that's slowly filling up with water, and you've got
Get rid of the
people
boat!
defending the current system with buckets, bailing water out of the side, and the boat's still sinking, and they're saying we've only got a mile to go to land, and then I'm coming over with my saw in my hand, like I've got a solution. We're gonna cut pieces off the boat. Here we go.
Or just we don't need the boat. We're gonna swim.
We can just swim to land.
Yeah.
And maybe swimming to land is the answer.
You may be right, and at any point in history, it may be right. That's the other thing, right? And again, I don't want to overstate the case for a lot of these things. At any point in history, the right answer might be, okay, we don't need this thing anymore because the situation on the ground changes, the human productivity changes. At some point in history, it could be the day when delete all IP law, as Jack Dorsey tweeted.
Did he?
He certainly did, which is very comfortable for him because he's already has all the money. Is something that could happen and could be a good idea. I think we are not there today for a number of reasons that hopefully I've laid out. But like everything is always on the table. I just want people to appreciate they only look at the problems and then they think, well, just get rid of the thing and you won't have the problems. Like, yeah, but you won't have any solutions either. And that's the problem that we face when we talk about things like changing IP law. And we just have to be appreciative that it's way more complicated when you're talking about things of this scale and how it's all worked out. It's remarkable that it got to the place that it did, and thinking we have some magical solution without ever having tested it is fairly naive, right? That's the way I look at it.
Well, I don't think anybody could possibly be have been more fair-minded and. The
YouTube comments won't agree with that, but okay.
do you think YouTube lean? Yeah, they probably do lean. Abolish all IP, don't they?
Or even if they don't, they just will disagree with everything I said. So they won't be like, oh, he was very fair-minded. That's not. That's not. There's no
prove us
comment.
wrong, YouTube. I want to see a glowing comment section that's only saying
right. Yeah. The top comment is that was very fair-minded in all the upvotes, and I'm like, okay. They'll do that now because I said
would be the trollish thing to do. So.
Now I've reversed psychology. I just figured out the way to guarantee that my top comment is positive by like psyching them out. So now, who knows? Right?
Your top troll out there is currently curled up in a ball in his head.
Doesn't know what to do.
He's like, normally I'm 2 steps ahead, but this time he's got me.
I forked the road in a very unpleasant way. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me. Very enlightening conversation.
Oh, thanks for coming on. It was fun to talk about.
Is there anything that you want to? I guess I feel it's polite as the host to give you a chance to plug things.
No, not really. Actually, I appreciate the opportunity to plug. I guess what I would say, because I felt like this topic, this is not an area of expertise for me, right? Like a lot of times we go on, we talk about programming or something, where something I spent my whole life doing. And I can say like, okay, these are some things that I've studied in a lot of detail and have maybe better insights into. What we've been talking about is something that like I have to interface with just like everyone else, right? It's sort of a thing that is, this is politics and law are this way. It's something that I have to interface with, but I have the same relationship to it to everyone else in the world Nobody has been a dictator for thousands of years and has tried all of these different systems and has meddled with them all and can tell you the right answers, right? And so, this conversation, it was fun for me too. And I have nothing to plug because I have nothing to sell you or to tell you about IP or about any of these things. I guess I would just ask everyone out there to keep an open mind about the fact that IP law may be doing a bunch of really good things. And when you're going to talk about fixing problems that you see, which I may also agree are problems, think about how do you still protect artists and make sure that they get paid commensurate to the kind of value that they're bringing to the world. Because as much as you might want to claim that that's not happening right now, it really kind of is. And even the most monstrous people you might point to, like your Disneys or whatever, are paying so many artists to do so much work every day. And I don't want those people to lose their jobs. I don't want them to have to be people who only get to work on this in their free time. I want to see a future where that is still it's a viable thing to send. I spent my whole life working on how to draw cartoons. I want that to happen. I don't want that person to have to be poor for some reason, or to have to be a lower class citizen who isn't getting paid the same as someone who makes something physical, because I really do value the contributions that they've made to society. And I'm not just saying that because I work in an IP field. I'm saying that because I work with artists. I've seen great artists at work, and I value what they do, and I think IP law has done more good for them overall than harm. So if anything, what I would like you to do, if people out there working on this kind of thing, is, figure out how to keep rewarding those people and keep them employed. And if you can reduce some negative aspects of the system, I am so in favor of that. But abolish it is not a great sale to me, because I worry about those people very much, and I don't think people have thought it through. That's what I would say. So.
Well, very, very well said, and very, very balanced. And I'll have to get Richard Stallman on to refute all your points.
Yes. The man who conveniently has all his stuff paid for all the time. Yeah. So
very good.
Yeah. But thank
Great.
you very much
Thank
for having
you,
me
Casey.
on, Luke. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure.